Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on reviewing. We are really grateful to have Clive, Grant and Laurence West with us today.
Thank you, Amanda. This is Clive talking. Laurence?
This is Laurence talking. Good morning.
So what we're going to cover today, as Amanda has said, is that we're going to do this webinar to examine 3 areas which will complement the cup of tea videos, which we hope that you've had a look at. We're going to look at how to brief, and that's an instructor session, which is a practical session. We're then going to watch the session, and we're going to look at what we look at, what the aim of that is, and what we select, the feedback points. And then the third part is planning and delivering the review. Questions, as Amanda has said, we will put your hand up, ask a question. We'll either decide to answer it then, or we'll do a group answer at the end. Laurence, anything to add, please?
Not at this point.
Thank you. So moving into, we're going to just set the scene for you, just so that we're clear of what we're going to try and achieve. So the cup of tea model it's just a vehicle for the delivery of an instructor session, and it focuses on the coach, the trainer, what we do and how we do it and why we do it. The aim of using this cup of tea is to take out the discipline specific sessions. So it's not a dinghy session, it's not a powerboat session in land waterways, PwC, or anything specific. It's generic, so that we can get into the parts of what the trainer coach does, rather than get down into the teaching points or the aims. Laurence, anything to add?
Yes, so people have had a chance to have a look at the cup of tea, and possibly while sitting watching that, you may be thinking, what's this all about? Why am I having to plow through this? I can make a cup of tea, etc. So, as Clive's pointed out, it's a vehicle. It would have been far better, I think we'd all agree, if we could have watched a real session. But the practicalities of that at any time are very difficult. To try and film a session on the go without any preamble or scripting, in order to then have some material to look at, to feed back on, is incredibly difficult. Plus, having put all these sort of things together during lockdown, it was impossible. So it was either no material at all, or, well, we've got the cup of tea sitting there. It's a bit tried and tested and old and crusty these days, but at least it's something to work back from. So if you're wondering why we're using that, there are some very practical reasons why we did. So apologies, but it's all we had at the time. Clive.
Thanks, Laurence. Very, very clear. And so we're going to focus on these generic techniques. So what is our aim? What are we going to try and achieve today, as we said, linked to these cup of tea videos? Well, we're going to look at how do we brief an instructor session? What is the trainer, the coach's input into that? Then we're going to look at, so then when they are running the session, then what are we going to do? What do we look for when they are delivering? And then what points do we select? And then how do we structure our review? We'll look at detail in that. And then the outcome, hopefully, is that you'll have a clear understanding of how to brief instructors, how to review, what techniques we're going to use, and the structure and the style of those reviews. Laurence?
No, I think we can crack on. Hopefully that's nice and clear.
Thanks, Laurence. So let's have a look at a briefing of an instructor. Reflect back on what you saw when I was sat next to Laurence and Laurence was briefing me about making that cup of tea. What did you see? The aim, Laurence's aim, was to ensure that the session was safe and effective. That's fundamental to all of this. So what information are we trying to convey? So as the trainer or the coach, we want to say what is the aim, who we have, and when they're going to do it. But we allow the instructor to fill in the what, the where, and the how. That is really, really important that they have that control, the what, the where, and the how. Laurence, do you want to add depth to that?
If I may, So we're doing this from the point of view that all those who are listening are hopefully going to be successful and become coaches and trainers and move on to run their own instructor courses. And that's absolutely what we hope will happen. Now, on a course, this part can, if we're not careful, start to grow. So the briefing between the coach / trainer and the instructor needs to be just that. It needs to be brief. So these folk are wanting to get on with their sessions, but there's a danger that we can spend an awful lot of time on this one, trying to iron out every wrinkle before the session actually takes place. And what I've noticed in past years is that this part can sometimes be as long as the session. So we've got to be a little bit careful there. And we've also got to make sure that we don't impact too much on what the potential instructors are going to do. Otherwise, we could end up debriefing our own session with these folk. So provided we know it's going to be safe, what they're going to do, so we can look at a session, and if it's, I don't know, picking up a mooring that they've planned, we're actually looking at picking up a mooring session on the water, and then an overview of what they're going to have in there in terms of their teaching points. That's it, really. And if we spend any longer on that, we can get lost in the whole of that briefing part and lose impact of the session that we'll be ultimately viewing and feeding back upon. Clive.
Yeah, thanks, Laurence. That's very clear. So that's just covered the detail. How much detail do we actually put into that? So as Laurence has said, very little. To reflect back, what did Laurence say to me when I was going to do that session? It was very, very limited on how to do that. So then once they've done that briefing and the instructors had a quick think about it, they may come back and they may need some support from you, but that's if required. Otherwise, you can assume that the instructor is just going to get on, get all their bits that they need to go and deliver, and they'll just get on with the session. So then we have to watch the session or not. So the first thing we need to look at is where will we be situated? And there's a couple of options that we can do here. We can either go out in the powerboat with them and we can watch the session from sitting alongside them. Now that's got some good things and it's got some bad things with it. Good thing is we can see exactly what the instructor's doing. We can maybe offer some input into their powerboating skills. But the bad thing about that is we're almost sat on the shoulder, and that might feel a bit intimidating if the coach is sat there or the trainer is sat there all the time. So where else can we be situated? Laurence, where would you like to be?
If it's all possible, frankly, I'd like to be out in the support craft with the candidate, but you highlighted the problems with that. Another advantage of doing that is that, especially in the early part of the course, when the potential instructors are possibly finding it all a little bit new, you're right on hand to be able to offer a little bit of guidance, and some of the feedback can be going on in situ almost. But as Clive's pointed out, you have to be careful that you don't interfere with the session. So another craft would be quite handy, probably another powered craft, frankly, because if it's a sailing course, dinghy instructor course, going out in another dinghy can have its problems. In other words, you're busy sailing the boat the whole time and not necessarily able to see everything that's going on, and therefore perhaps not in a position to be able to give a full debrief on what went on. Nice though it would be. So being in a separate craft is quite handy if that's possible. It's not always possible to have a second safety craft in order to be able to do that. Clive.
Thanks, Laurence. Yeah, so wherever you position yourself, it's got benefits and there's also detriments to being there. I do like to be out on the water, but of course that's if you are managing that effectively. If you can get out on the water with them, you may be running a session on your own. So as a senior instructor, you may be running a session and the instructor might be running a session which is remote from you. So just think about, where can I be situated? Then we can sort of think to ourselves, so what are we actually looking for during the session? What are the bits that we're going to look at? And once we've looked at that, we need to make sure that we've captured that. That's what we call the evidence. So we need to look at what was good, and also, are there any development areas? So we're looking for the bits that they did well and we want them to repeat. And we're going to look at bits that they're not doing so well, that maybe we need to develop and come to a conclusion on how we can change those. And Laurence and Rachel and others did a presentation on note-taking, which is a previous CPD session, which you might want to refer to. Laurence, do you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, the second bullet point there, what we're looking for, there's an easy answer there, everything. So what we're trying to take in is every little facet of what's gone on in that session. What we're of course doing afterwards, and then we refer to this in the note-taking presentation, is that then there will be a sifting of that information to determine what's going to have the most impact in the debrief at the end of it. But the reason that we ask experienced people to become coaches and trainers is that they can look at pictures in front of them and take in that information and make decisions on what information is going to have the greatest impact on the success or otherwise of a session. Clive.
Thanks, Laurence. Yeah, and also it doesn't have to match what you would do. That session, remember, they do the how they will do it. So if it was effective and it met the aims, then that's okay. It doesn't have to match what you would have done necessarily. So then, as Laurence has just said, you look at everything, you take the notes, and then you have to look at, so what am I going to feed back? What is it that I need to have a conversation about with this instructor? And using the rule of threes, which I think was mentioned in the CPD note-taking. And
yes,
as we've just said, it's got to be both good and development. So you're now going to select those points to feed back. And we may want to follow one of the models. Was it safe? Safety is also, always at the paramount. Is it safe? If it isn't, we need to go there. We need to go and do safety. Anything you'd like to add, Laurence?
Only I hope people noticed how you cleverly avoided using the word bad. I think that word has disappeared now from our vocabulary, hasn't it? So what's good and what needs to be improved? Clive.
Thank you.
You don't need to improve, Clive. You're doing fine.
Depends on who you talk to. Okay, so now we need to plan the review and now we need to deliver the review. Let's go into that. So let's have a look at some guiding principles. One of the biggest things is the honesty. As a coach trainer, you have to be honest. And that's looking at the session, basing it on evidence, which you've either got in your notebook or somewhere else. If you tend not to use notes, that's okay too, but it has to be honest. Laurence.
On the coach and trainer courses, we very often have to come back to this one because we will see sessions that are run and frankly, they haven't gone quite so well. It would be very easy at that point to ignore, gloss over, and just concentrate and pluck out the good points. But that's really only doing half the job, and it's not really helping the candidates. So we will need to, or you will find that you will need to, from time to time, to go to areas that are uncomfortable. And the only advice we can give on that one is if you give an honest appraisal of what you've seen, then it's going to have an impact of a positive nature. But avoiding it is not going to help. The other side of that, the good side of it is, even though you have to go to areas, and we would expect you to go to areas where it's uncomfortable and hasn't gone so well, that will be followed up straight away with how to put it right, how to correct it, how to make it better. So that uncomfortableness, if that's a word, is only going to be for a short period, and it will always be backed up or given a solution to ensure it doesn't happen again. Clive.
Thanks, Laurence. So Laurence always says on the course, if you don't spot it, we certainly have. So actually, you're not stabbing them in the back, your colleagues on the course. What you actually do is you're shooting yourself in the foot. So be honest, base it on evidence. And it's based on their performance. Was it successful? Did it meet the aim? If it didn't, then why didn't it? So now we have to structure the review. We're going to look at this at a coach trainer level. So what structure are we going to use? Well, hopefully we're going to use one of the reviewing models that we know and we've used effectively for many, many years. Now, as an instructor and as a senior instructor, we're should be very competent with the hairdryer or the hamburger review. We're very much coming into the hamburger where we're starting to sell it a bit more. But the domain of the coach and the trainer level is more about the traffic lights, the TED, tell me, explain, describe. We're having what we term a coaching conversation, a two-way process where we want to engage with the other person. Laurence.
Well, I think you put your finger on it right there, because although it's not actually in text there, the coaching conversation is one of the key tools, if you like, or one of the key parts of the coach/trainer course. And that's what we'll be encouraging to happen. And it's a little bit different. It's not giving feedback necessarily about specific skills. It's a much more rounded, it's a little bit more fluffy. I've heard it described in the past, what we're trying to get hold of. But in terms of this conversation, this two-way street with the trainer/coach and the candidate, if we don't get into that area of traffic light and TED, then we're missing a trick and we're not actually going to get the full value of the course for the candidate.
Thanks, Laurence. And that's what we're going to spend a lot of the time on the course doing, is looking at this coaching conversation at the end, going to your notes, being honest with your appraisal, looking at both good and development areas, and then having that conversation, taking that candidate there. And we'll look at how we're going to do that on the course. So now we're going to look at the delivery of the review. I just want to start to talk about your positioning and how to start. And we're going to be looking at body language. Now, Nessa and I are going to be doing a further CPD session when we're going to be looking at building rapport. So we can cover that in more depth there. But we need to position ourselves. We also need to look at where do we go and take the group from distraction, a quiet spot. Laurence, anything else you want to add?
Well, yes, I think so. On this one, we spend a little bit of time on the course deciding on where might be best to position ourselves, where to take the candidates to have a chat. Usually we say we need to take people away from distractions, go to a more comfortable place where we can usually have a bit of a sit down and a chat. This was all before social distancing. So having less space between us was seen as a positive thing in the past, because it broke down any barriers that might have existed. Unfortunately, now we don't have that option, and we're going to be at least 2 meters apart when we do this. So there will be that to consider in this brave new world of ours. Clive.
Yeah, good point. And maybe trying to, with the face mask on, will be quite difficult, Laurence.
Well, not for me, but for the face for radio. But for other people, then yes, using a face mask or even a bit of double glazing, we might have to consider that. I'm joking.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start the review, as we've always said, is we're going to give them something positive, what was good and why. And we're starting to build rapport. As Laurence said earlier, honest, we need to go to that area. We need to say what was good and maybe what wasn't so good. And it's always good to say why it was good. So I liked that because, or that was good because, or the session may have been a bit clunky. It may not have achieved its aim. Now, they knew that it didn't go so well. You know that it didn't go so well. Their mind at that particular time is on that session didn't go well, and they may want to talk about it. If you try and take that review to a different area, they will not be with you. They want to discuss it. They want to get it out. They maybe want to see what your thoughts are, how they could put it better. Laurence.
Yeah, so very often if there's been a mistake or a bit of a lash up in a session, that's the only thing the candidate can think about. That, oh, it's all gone wrong, I've failed the course, blah, blah, I've made it right. mess of the whole thing, made a fool of myself in front of my peers, blah, blah. So until that has been addressed, until we've talked about that one, they're probably not going to hear anything else of the conversation that you have with them. So it's quite an easy one, this one. Often it's anything you want to talk about, so that maybe didn't go as well as we were expecting, and just get that out the way up front, and then I can usually make the rest of the conversation much more useful and effective because it's out of the way, it's done, sorted. Let's look at the other areas.
Yeah, and you can't skip around it, as Laurence was saying, that front of mind for them is that that didn't go particularly well, maybe didn't go as they planned. Give them an opportunity to say why it didn't go so well. Maybe they will come and say, look, I didn't realize that was going to happen. Just jumping back to the briefing, as Laurence was saying, when they're briefing the session, or sorry, when you're briefing the session, they're going to feed back to you and you have that conversation. If you'd have changed it, that wouldn't have happened and their learning wouldn't have been maximized. So again, by taking over and giving in too much information in the briefing, maybe would have affected the session. So they want to go and have a look at it. Their mind won't be anywhere else. So go there. Go there first of all. And also what we can do is just by a little look on your face, you can kind of make a face and go, that wasn't so good, was it? They will say, no, open up that conversation. So then we need to develop that review. So however it starts, one good question using the structure that we've got in our review, we're now going to be looking at the traffic light or this coaching conversation. So we're going to be asking effective questions during this review. We want to develop their involvement. The only way that we can develop their involvement is by having this conversation, is by handing over that conversation to them. So we need to ask them questions. Laurence.
It's always a tricky one, especially if you haven't used it before. I'll hand that one back to you for the time being, because we're maybe going to get a bit more coming out of this slide, and I'll come in at the end.
So this is what we need to do, is we need to use these open questions, the why, the what, the where, the how, the who, but be careful with the why. Why can sometimes be a bit challenging. So I tend to strip why out, unless it's to clarify. So what did you do that? So why did you do that? And I definitely use TED. TED is the one that I go to all the time. That's tell me, explain, describe. If you start any sentence with TED, then you know you're going to go into the why, the what, the where, the when, the who, or the how. Laurence.
It's a sticky one, this one, isn't it? Because very often we have found, well, I think on just about every course, people get hold of the concept, they understand what's required, and why we do it, and then they say, right, can we have a list of questions, please? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. I think there's going to be a bullet point coming up in possibly in this slide or the next one, as to the reasons why we ask questions, but also the reasons why we can't give a list of questions. Am I right in thinking that, Clive?
Yeah, you're right. So,
but questions are undoubtedly your friend. Open questions, which I think might be the next one, definitely will be your friend. But there's a little catch coming. Stand by.
So we have to try and seek solutions from them, and that's okay if they are experienced, but if they're novice instructors, then you need to offer guidance. This is where we're going to support the instructor. So what I noticed was this: how could you rectify that? Why did you think that that was so bad or so difficult? Why did that have that action? Then they can say, well, I don't know. What could I have done? Then you need to go and offer guidance to seek a solution to that.
Hey.
If you take nothing else away from this slide, it's this, and that's listening. Laurence.
Pardon? That was a joke. We're not very good at listening. And one of the reasons for that is, especially on the course, when we've looked at a session, having briefed it, of course, we've got our notes, we then have a pathway, we've got a route, we know where we're wanting to go, we know 3 points that we want to get across, and here we go, pin your ears back, we're off. But the problem is, very often, is that the coach candidates don't get the answers they were expecting. And then they have a choice to make. They either stick with their agenda or they follow the route that the instructor candidate has given them. And that's the harder of the two. It's very easy just to stick with a route that we've got written down in our notebooks. What we will be saying on the course, though, is you have to leave what's written in your notebooks, potentially, probably, and follow what the candidate has given you, because what the candidate has given back to you in their answer is what is important to them. So we have to go with that, because that is going to have the most impact within the debrief. So listening to the answers that are coming back and then following those answers is actually paramount. Snag is, it's pretty difficult to do on the hoof, and it's very difficult to do early on in this whole process. Clive.
Yeah, so when you're starting to learn, you'll want to go back to the comfort blanket of your notebook. So go back to that video, watch what happens in this phase with Laurence. Laurence has his notes there, they're on his lap, he's ready to use them, but actually he follows my train of thought. If I don't get it, then what he's going to do is he's going to probe a bit more. He's going to just say, so what about this? So what about that? And try and follow that line that the instructor wants to go down. Then if that comes to you solutionize that, then what Laurence does, he goes back to his notes. So let me just have a quick look at my notes. Ah, yes. And now you can go off on a different avenue. There again, you pose the question and you listen to see what the instructor is saying. So that's please listen. And we're going to be doing another webinar about listening, what barriers to listening, and how we can listen effectively. That's okay. So let's have a look at the summary of the review. We've done the brief, we've watched the session, we've made our notes, we've now done the review, and now what we need to do is we need to check understanding. So the final aspect of this is to ensure that the instructor is going to take away the bits that we wanted to feed back. We may have gone down another little avenue where the instructor wanted help and support. And what the instructor will do is they will definitely focus on the negative side. So what we need to do is we need to put a positive slant on that too. We also want to go on to the positives of what they've done well, because we want them to repeat that. That's the bit that went well, please do that again. And now look at the other areas. If you change that, then that session would have been more effective. If, however, the session did go well and it was effective and it did meet its aim, we can tick all those boxes. But what we might want to have is a conversation about, so how could we do that differently? And look at the good and maybe the detrimental bits of doing it differently. Laurence.
It's an important aspect, this one, because I'm going to sound like I'm down with the kids here. The candidates very often will beat themselves up more than they will big themselves up. So they tend to focus on a negative, as can we. And early on in my coaching career, I always used to find myself going towards the bad stuff, if you like. I've used the word, it's out there, sorry. Because that was the bit I thought I could have the most effect on and put it right. But in doing so, I used to neglect the good stuff that went on and just sort of tick that off. Well, I expected to see that, so it should be there and it should be there the next time. But of course, it might not be, because the candidates haven't yet worked out, possibly, what's good and what's bad. That word again. So focusing on the positive aspects to make sure that they are repeated, reinforced, and happen every time is as important, almost, as sorting out the less than positive stuff. So it can be coming at it from both sides, if you like. So making sure that we're concentrating on that will help. Clive.
Yeah, just keep working on that, Laurence, and I think you will become a bit more effective.
I think I'll get there. There's a hope.
Yeah, I think yeah, maybe we'll have a conversation off the back of this.
Thank you. Will you be asking questions?
So first, when we look at this summary, just ask if they have any questions, just to sort of round that off. And then we need to try and seek a summary from them. Little techniques of like, what will they do more of, what will they do less of? What have they learned? What will they do again, and what will they change? Or something that will just prompt them to think about. And you'll have your own style. Laurence, how do you finish off? What's your summaries like?
It's you'd have to ask the candidates. 3 is the magic number here. It's useful for them because it rounds up what we've been talking about. It's useful for you because if they give you back those 3 points that possibly you had, and I will say to them, if you can get the candidates to tell you what you've got written in your notebook, you've nailed it. So if they're giving you back what you expected to hear, it's a pretty reasonable punt that they have got it and that it was time well spent. So making sure that summary happens is of importance. And of course, if you were being really uncharitable, it might be the only bit they've ever listened to, is those last 3 bits, because they just couldn't wait to get away, which I believe sometimes happens in your debriefs, Clive.
Probably, Laurence. Yeah. And the other good thing is, do they understand? Are they taking the bits away that you really wanted to feed back, or are they still in that negative domain? So you want to lift them. You don't want them to go away feeling all doom and gloom, which is what they normally do when they walk away from Lawrence's reviews. But we'll leave that for another day.
Absolutely.
So I tend to think of the review. To me, if I try and speak into a metaphor, it's like you want to get this bubbling pot, is that it's got a life of its own. We're going to put it on the stove, and then what we need to do is we need to ignite the flame under it, and we need to get it bubbling. And that's where me, as the coach, the trainer, I'm going to generate the heat by asking some really good questions, I hope. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to reduce the heat. So, and that's get them to talk with me, just probing again, asking little questions. So what about this? What about that? Tell me, explain, describe. And then we've got to turn the gas off to bring it to an end. Otherwise, they speak for Great Britain, and this review is going to go on. Because like the brief, this review has got to be effective. It's got to be succinct so that the clarity comes from this. I talk about white noise a lot. If there's too much white noise in this debrief, they won't take away the bullet points, which is what you're trying to feed back. That's why the summary is so important. So we have to bring it to a conclusion. And then what we should be left with is this concentrated stock that's come to the boil, it's bubbled away, and then the summary is this concentrated, effective feedback. Go on, Laurence, do it.
Well, I just got stuck on the bit where you said white noise, and I thought how appropriate. This slide is it paints such a glorious picture, and it summarizes everything that we've talked about. Unfortunately, it leaves me with a mental image of you, hobbit-like, hovering or crouching over a bubbling cauldron, and I'll just never get that out of my head, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And probably a few other people will be thinking the same.
Exactly the same.
So what about sources of information? The RYA can point you off to their instructor handbooks. Now, a lot of them are now aligned, but if you're not a windsurfing trainer or instructor, go into the windsurfing instructor's manual, have a look at it. There's some really good top tips in the instructing phase, the same as the G19, G14 and the Yachtmaster scheme. And this is a non-specific CPD session that we're trying to do here. Have a look at them, see what they say, how can I be more effective? We also have the other resources on the website. The top link is the training support site, and that's the CPD, that's where all of this is being put online. We also have the SI workbook, again in there. It is a workbook, but there's some very good bits of information in all of those. So we can look towards those to help us in our development. Laurence.
I think it's covered. The resources are out there. Go make use of them. Some good stuff there.
Yeah. So let's just summarize what we've looked at, I hope. So we've looked at how to brief our instructors, practical session, aim, and structure. We've then looked at how we watch the session, where we position ourselves, what's the aim, and then also how we select our feedback points using notes, etc. Then we plan and we deliver the review. We spend a lot of time on the course doing that. So you've had a look at the session, and sometimes on the course we cut it short, as you probably can do on your instructor courses. Once you've seen enough and they have enough to look at, then we will do the review. So firstly, it's thank you very much for watching this and taking the time to do this CPD. Laurence?
Thank you, Clive. Thank you for your patience.
So has anybody got any final questions? Have we got any questions that we need to clarify?
Silence.
Silence.
Clive. Thank you very much, both Clive and Laurence, for this presentation. It's fantastic. Have we got any questions? We've had one person drop out because he's had a Coast Guard call out. But otherwise, anyone who's remaining, do we have any questions for Clive or Laurence? There's nothing coming through. So that's a huge thank you from me and everyone at RYA Training to Laurence and Clive. And is there anything that you guys would like to finish off with?
Only that when people find themselves on the coach and trainers course, we'll go back over this. There'll be an opportunity, of course, to try this many times on the course, because that's the way we structure it. If you're really lucky, you might get to see another cup of tea being made, because it's always a highlight of any course, of course. But hopefully people have got a little bit more of an idea of what we're trying to achieve with that. It's all about the coaching conversation. It's not about the tea. The tea is just a vehicle. If anybody's got another way of presenting that, please fire away. What I will say is, often people say, well, can we get some real instructors in to run some real sessions? And then as coaches and trainers, then we'll offer feedback. It's been tried, it's been done. It was a disaster. The instructors got absolutely pulled apart, and they vowed they would never do that ever again in their careers.